Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for joining us here today for Bartlett's very first cybersecurity event. My name is Holly Mazaka. I'm a wealth advisor and principal here at Bartlett Wealth Management. It is my pleasure to introduce to you today Neal O'Farrell, your personal security guide. Neal is regarded as one of the world's original security experts and privacy mavens. He has been fighting cybercrime and identity theft for over 35 years, longer than most of us have even realized that they were threats. It's funny how sometimes your calling finds you. Neal was originally introduced to security way back in the 1980s when he was in college, and a friend showed him how you could use a simple floppy disk to steal passwords. Neal started his career in security protecting European banks and governments from the first generation of hackers, including winning the first ever contract to protect and encrypt Ireland's entire national ATM network back in 1988. Neal is passionate about the importance of educating users to defeat cyber threats. He is the author of 2 books, including Double Trouble: Protecting Your Identity in the Age of Cybercrime. As the hackers have stepped up their game, Neal has continued his mission to expand his work, now advising police departments, Fortune 500 companies, many different security firms, and over the past decade has expanded his work to serve high net worth individuals through financial firms such as Bartlett. Neal is also the expert behind Bartlett's Cybersecurity Education Center. The link to this education center is included on the handouts in front of you, and you can also find it on our homepage, bartlett1898.com. The online portal hosts helpful videos, articles, and self-audits to allow you to take control of your safety in the cyber world. I encourage you to check it out and share it with a friend. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage Neal O'Farrell.
Thank you, Holly, and thank you, Bartlett, for daring to leave me alone in a room with you. I'm not the good news bear. This is not a motivational speech. I'm not going to tell you how to be the best possible version of you. I'm just going to tell you how to be the only version of you. I think that probably the greatest impact I had on anyone individually when it came to security. I'm going to drop some names here. A couple of years ago, I was invited to speak about, the irony of it, the rise of surveillance capitalism. You know, all these companies that snoop on you for your personal data just for profit, so you are their profit. And it happened to be the headquarters of Facebook in Menlo Park before we knew about Cambridge Analytica and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I gave my speech, I gave my chat. Sky's falling in, we're all doomed. And at the end of it, I said to the audience, not unlike yourselves, so now that you know what you know and you've heard what you heard, what's the first thing that you're going to do when you leave this room? And a guy in the middle of the audience puts up his hand. I said, okay, what are you going to do? I'm going to Home Depot. And I thought, okay, well, put that in the lost column, I guess. I said, no, I'm going to Home Depot, I'm going to buy a shovel, I'm going to go home, I'm going to dig a hole in the yard, and I'm going to crawl up in the fetal position. So I thought after that I should kind of tone it down a little bit, not so much doom and gloom. So here's the toned down version. We are almost all doomed. Thank you for coming, visit the website. So I'm kind of good news, bad news. So the bad news is this is all the bad news. This is all, and when you hear the bad news, you think it was an understatement. It's really, really bad news. It's a really scary world that we're dealing out there. And then over here is just the good news. It's just a little bit, it's like 99% bad news, 1% good news. The good news about the good news is that the good news kills the bad news. So there's an awful lot of hype and nonsense about cybersecurity and identity theft. And they're related. They are first cousins. Most of the hype is real, a lot of the hype isn't. So I'm going to try and show you the connections between the two and then separate out a little bit of the hype so you've got some really useful, valuable the world is not ending soon kind of information to go away with. So let me start by asking for a hands up. How many people have been a victim of identity theft? That's not so bad. How many people actually, because normally when I do it, it's like 3/4 of the room put their hands up. So probably the rest of you have been, you just don't know it yet. So start digging, start checking your credit reports. How many actually know someone who's been a victim of identity theft? Okay. So here's some of the bad news that we talked about earlier. So I first started investigating and writing about identity theft in 2000, so nearly 20 years ago. And people go, "How are you writing about that? It's just nonsense. It's just credit card fraud or something." Less than 3 years later, 2.5 years later, I was the first expert to train an entire police department in identity theft awareness. So in less than 3 years, it had gone from identity what to cops saying we are overwhelmed with victims of this crime. Today, we are now seeing 1 million new victims of identity theft every 30 days. 1 million every 30 days, one every 2 seconds. The cost to consumers is about $1 billion every 30 days. So when they say that the identity theft really is a victimless crime, someone's paying that money, $1 billion. I think it's 16 billion a year we're now losing to identity theft. It's lost to consumers, it's lost to merchants, and that all filters down typically to us. And that doesn't include the billions of dollars that organizations are spending on security and on fraud prevention and fraud detection. So it's on a massive scale. The good news, the majority of the identity theft cases we are seeing out there, you can make go away with a phone call. They are not, the world is over. They are not the original cases we used to see where someone's hijacked your identity, has bought an RV in your name, bought a motorcycle in your name, filed for bankruptcy in your name, and then died in your name. I've actually seen a victim like that. It's not quite that bad relative to the number of victims we're seeing, but if you are one of those worst victims, it can be a nightmare. A lot of the presentations that I give, I talk in terms of the victims that I've worked with, to use their stories to share what I've learned, and also the thieves. I've interviewed thieves in prison. I've interviewed a very notorious identity thief who was still in the witness protection program. So you get kind of these perspectives that make you think a little bit differently about these crimes. So this particular victim, 23 years when I first started working with her. She had just graduated college. She lives on the East Coast. Just joined the Navy, serving her first tour in the Mediterranean, in the Middle East. And her mother sent her a text message, "Next chance you get, Google your name." So she did, and she found a dossier on every member of her family on the internet. So we were talking about 5 or 6, it was immediate family, parents, grandparents, siblings. So all their names, all their dates of birth, social security numbers, every address they've ever lived at, credit cards with passwords, email accounts with passwords, every vehicle they've ever owned, make, model, VIN number, color, not just the driver's license numbers, but the actual copies of their driver's license. And on and on. It was a massive dossier. It was posted on multiple hacker websites. She was a victim of identity theft over 100 different times because of this information. She was arrested 3 times by cops thinking she was someone else. Her house was swatted by law enforcement, kicked in the door, broke down the windows looking for her. When she went to apply for her first mortgage, she was told that not only would she not get a mortgage, she probably never would. One of the companies that was a victim of fraud, the thieves purchased over $130,000 worth of jewelry. The jeweler said, "We don't care what evidence you have, we don't care what police report you have, we don't care what identity theft affidavit you have, we are holding you liable, we're going to court." So her life was completely turned upside down. That was in 2012. I spoke to her this morning. I said, "So how are things going?" She said, "It's the usual." They opened up another 10 accounts this month. And I said, "Isn't your credit frozen?" "Yeah, they can get around that." And the worst is I've had to change my number 3 times because they keep hacking it. So, and the worst for her is having to change a phone number because now no one knows how to contact her. And every time she tries to change a password to like a credit card accounts or bank accounts, the two-factor authentication won't work because she can't give them the correct number. So I've been investigating this case now since 2012. So think about this. This one particular victim, whoever got their hands on her personal information must have hacked into multiple databases. I mean, the DMV, FedEx accounts, bank accounts. They even knew the name, the model number of her router, her computer router, her Wi-Fi router in her home. We are pretty certain that the individual behind the crime was 12 years old. A young wannabe hacker who also swatted Ashton Kutcher and Justin Bieber. So if a 12-year-old can break into all these government agencies and all these banks and all these credit card companies and share all this information, just imagine the capabilities of the professional crooks that we're seeing now. Did I talk about all this bad news? I'm getting to the good news. There is good news eventually. I can tell by your mood I'm kind of, the doom and the gloom is settling in. Let me give you an example of another simple one, far more simple. A young woman in Southern California went to the DMV, their version of the BMV, to renew her driver's license. And when she showed up, she was told, you're not getting a driver's license, you have 2 DUIs that you have to take care of. She had no DUIs, perfectly clean record. So she said, well, okay, well, just give me the information and I'll find out who it was and who I have to report it to and who I have to file a complaint with. And good old California, they said, well, according to California privacy rules, we can't tell you. So that simple act of going to renew her driver's license, she now couldn't renew her insurance, which meant she couldn't drive, which meant she couldn't get to work, which meant she was really, really, really in fear of losing her job. So, and again, had no idea where, how, why, had no idea where to turn. So she was talking to us, and a couple of days after we first took on the case, she did get a letter from Northern California saying, hey, you know, you've got these 2 DUIs that you've got to take care of, so you need to install in your car within the next 30 days a breathalyzer ignition system, which is going to cost you a couple of grand. So at least she knew what jurisdiction. So we contacted the jurisdiction, we told them the story. They said, by all means, as long as she gets a police report, we can start the process of investigating and seeing who's the arresting officer, what are the other information they might have gathered at the scene and so on. So we approached the law enforcement in Southern California and said, we have this victim of identity theft. She needs to come in to file a police report. And the detective said, that's a great idea, bring her in. However, as soon as she shows up, we have to arrest her because she has 2 outstanding warrants for DUIs. So in order just to get her police report, she would have to face arrest. She would sit in a jail in Southern California, and, you know, jails in California are not that empty. She would have to sit in a jail in California, wait to see if Northern California wanted to extradite her, then wait to be extradited, then go up to Northern California. So she could have been in jail for months just trying to figure out who had 2 DUIs in her name. So I guess the story is the vast majority of the identity thefts that you're going to see are not that terrible. But the bad ones are really, really bad. So if that's an incentive to do just a little bit more than what you're doing, I suggest that you do it. And in a couple of minutes, I'm going to tell you how. And by the way, we're going to do lots of Q&As. So if you've got a question, you've got an issue, you've got something that's on your mind, fire them at us, and we'll see if we can figure them out. So I'm going to switch to the other good news, cybercrime. So data breaches. In the last 7 years, we have seen an average of between 3 and 5 data breaches every single day. That's how the thieves are getting your information. So in the last 5 years, 14 billion personal records have been exposed in data breaches. I've met some of these hackers. I've worked with some of these hackers. It's just a massive party out there, stealing information from websites that collected the information legitimately and then didn't do a good job of protecting it. The vast majority of these data breaches are focused on identity theft. They want your identity, they want your personal information so they can steal your identity and cause mayhem. So I could go on. We're seeing ransomware. We're seeing an explosion in all kinds of malware. We're seeing an explosion in a business email compromise. There was a CEO about a week ago fell for a scam where his boss in Germany called him, and they had a very nice chat on the phone about paying an invoice that he'd forgotten to pay, and he paid it. It was about $250,000. Except it wasn't his boss. It was a fraudster using artificial intelligence who had managed to get a sample of his boss's voice and turn that into a legitimate conversation. This was a boss with a German accent, a very unusual way of speaking, but a thief was able to impersonate his boss using AI. So this is the future. If you thought the past was scary, this is what we're looking forward to. And once again, I can tell by your faces you're getting very, very down, so I'm going to stop all the bad stories. I think I've convinced you, right, that there are bad people out there doing really bad things. The good news, the really, really good news, is the most powerful security tool that you have available to you is wedged right between your ears. Most of these attacks can either be defeated or minimized by your behavior. If you just stop doing stupid stuff, and the stupid thing is just being apathetic or indifferent about it. If you stop clicking on stuff, I mean, we're always saying in security, cybersecurity is really a battle of body parts. It's the brain versus the index finger. We keep clicking on this because we're not listening to this. If we can break that connection, get people stop, oh, that's interesting. Let me just, oh, yeah, it looks, I know it's Nigerian prince, but maybe we are related. Maybe just click, boom. So if you think about it, the most sophisticated hackers out there, the most determined identity thieves, people who have nothing to do all day but figure out ways to dupe you. If you just pause, don't click, you beat them. You can beat the most sophisticated hackers on the planet by just slowing down and thinking before you do stuff. And it's the same across all your habits. The most common password in habit today is, the most common password in use today is password. Password is the most common password in use today. And how do we know? Because the hackers are selling those passwords on databases, and other hackers are going in and stealing those passwords, and then security experts are going in and listing all these. Here are the top 10 most common passwords in use today. So we're not guessing. We know you're using them because they're stealing them and posting them. Second most common, this is really genius. Obviously, someone put a lot of thought into this. Password 123. Sometimes 4-5. I can see some people going, oh, okay, memo to self, change password. QWERTY. Let me in. Open Sesame. My dog Sam. They're all there. I mean, if any of you are using passwords today that have any element of your name, your favorite team, a pet name, when you were born, where you were born, why you were born, how you were born, any derivation of your phone number, of your social security number, forget it. Get rid of them. We estimate that hackers using password cracking dictionaries can crack all of the most commonly used passwords and username in use today in about 60 seconds. So if your password is not at least 16 completely random characters long, it's going to be very easy for them to crack. Good news is there are things called password managers out there. Now, I'm going to give you lots of advice if we have time left to do it. No need to write anything down. Bartlett's got all this information. I babble a lot. I babble very fast. It's hard to keep up. So Bartlett's got all this information, all these tips, products that I recommend. I always recommend free products. So all that information is there. But if you want to be clever about your passwords, use a thing called a password manager. It remembers all your passwords. It generates them. It stores them. All you've got to do is remember that one master password. It's like a vault. But once it's sitting on your computer or on your phone, it automatically knows which password you're looking for, and it automatically fills it. Simple tips, simple strategies. Here's another way. Let's say you don't like using password managers. You're not tech friendly. You don't know why they ever bothered inventing that stuff in the first place. So a thing called a passphrase. So pick a phrase. I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio on July 24th, let's be generous, 61. So if you take that entire phrase, I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, capital I, lowercase w, lowercase b, capital C, capital O, you see where I'm going? That phrase alone is a completely random collection of maybe 12 or 14 numbers, letters, uppercase, lowercase. If you want to get really clever, flip the I into an exclamation mark. They'll never guess that. You can write it down. You can keep it at home. You can keep it on your computer, because the chances of a hacker in Russia figuring out that that's your password are pretty remote. So if you're not comfortable using technology to remember your passwords, passphrases are a fantastic idea. Write them down, and you can have multiple versions. So for example, let's say your date of birth was 1961. You could use that for your bank. For your email account, change it to 1962. For your Facebook account, 1963. Because the dictionaries that they use don't think that way. They're looking for words that they know. They're not looking for predictable sequences of your life, because they're random. They don't know who you are. They don't know where you were born, how you were born, when you were born. They're just looking for predictable patterns. Simple things like that. I could go on. How many of you have frozen your credit? Okay. The number one things that identity thieves are after is new credit. They want to open up new accounts in your name. The easiest way to prevent them is freezing your credit. Freezing your credit is now free to everyone, man, woman, and child in America, for good. Thanks to a lot of pressure in Washington, one thing they got right, I suppose. A lot of pressure on the credit bureaus. So freezing your credit means that while it's frozen, no one, no matter who they are, what information they have on you, DNA, blood samples, iris scans, cannot take out new credit in your name. There's no decision. It's automatically shut off. It is the single best thing you can do to protect yourself against the most common type of identity theft. So it's called a credit freeze. You place it on all three bureaus. Again, Bartlett will have the information. It's free. Do it for your kids as well. Child identity theft is the most common. They will take a child's social security number, build up credit over time, pay off the bills, change the address. You're not getting any information. Child turns 18, applies for the first phone in their credit, and they're told you can't. You're $250,000 in debt. We've seen that as well. So there are lots of little things like that you can do. On your bank account, for example. On my bank account, I think I have about 10 or 12 different alerts. So it'll alert me if someone is using my card at an ATM. If my balance gets below a certain level. I get that one a lot for some reason. If anyone tries to change a password, if anyone tries to do a transfer, I'm immediately alerted and given an option, yes or no. Go into your bank account, check all those, every single box, because it is the best way for you to determine if someone's got into your bank account, trying to change something, and you can actually block them. Speaking of cards, how many people still pay for stuff with their debit card or ATM card? Okay, that's good. We're winning. Okay. If you pay for stuff with your credit card and hackers get their hands on that information, they're stealing the bank's money. If they get their hands on your debit card and your PIN, they're stealing your money. Whose money would you prefer they steal? So if they get their hands on a card number or a card and a PIN number, and you swipe that, for example, at a gas station or at a supermarket checkout, they are straight into your bank account and clean it out. And just to give you an example of how the law works, you have zero liability typically with a credit card. You do to a certain extent with a debit card. However, we had a supermarket breach in California a few years ago called, ironically, Lucky Supermarkets. And so we were dealing with the victims. Every victim who had a credit card stolen got off easy. Virtually every victim who had an ATM and PIN, it took months to solve, because it gives the banks the opportunity to dig their heels in and say, well, we have a right to conduct an investigation, and we have at least 3 months to do that. We found in almost every case where the amount that the bank lost was more than $500, they didn't get it back. The bank simply said, whoever used that card had your number and your card, right? Or your number and your card. Correct. And the next question, the bank, they're almost working from a script. Did you ever lose your card? Did you ever share your PIN? Was it ever outside of your possession? No. Well, it had to be you. So never, ever use your ATM or your debit card for buying stuff. Use it for taking out cash from your ATM. I have this game. I go to the ATM, I take out my cash, and immediately I look at my phone and wait. See how long it takes for my bank to tell me that someone has taken out money from this particular ATM, it's typically 5 to 10 seconds. And lastly, and by the way, we'll open up the question, so if you've got anything specific, I'm happy to advise. If you have two-factor authentication, two-factor authentication is a security mechanism that most of your accounts have, even your social media accounts, where if someone tries to change anything like a password, they have to send a message to your phone and you've got to give authorization, which means the hacker has to have your number and your phone physically. Every account that you have, enable that. It is the #1 defense against account takeover. And quite often people will take over social media accounts so they can find out what your mother's maiden name is and your favorite teacher and your first dog, so then they can answer all those security questions at the banks. So anyone any happier yet with what I've told you? It's a pretty glum topic, right? Especially, thank God we have air conditioning here. It'll be a doubly glum day. So the world of cybersecurity truly is scary. There's an entire industry devoting to depriving you of your identity so that the thieves in most cases can deprive banks and merchants of the money. You have an incredibly important role to play in stopping that simply by changing your behavior. Take it more seriously. Get a little bit more involved. Be vigilant to the point of paranoia. The sky's not falling in. It's not all doom and gloom. I love technology. But the thieves will always take advantage of the people who are not paying attention when it matters most. And like I said, 9 times out of 10, you'll get away with it. It'll be you'll cancel a card, you'll cancel a charge. But that one case where you hijack, like that victim I talked about, who's now fighting it for 7 years, and when I was talking to her today, she said, I can't freeze my credit because I'm trying to build up my own, I can't freeze my credit report because I'm trying to build up my own adult credit. I need to take out credit cards, I need to take out loans. But for some reason, they know when I'm doing it, so every time I unfreeze, they take out new credit cards. It truly is frightening if you are one of the worst victims. The scary thing is with all these breaches, as one expert said a while ago, the reason that you're not all victims of identity theft is because we don't have enough thieves. They have all your information 1,000 times over if you think of all these breaches. They just don't have enough time to get to you. So just be patient. Be patient. Your number will come up. They will get to you. So if ever there was a time to put your shields up, to put your guard up, now is the time. Anybody got any questions, or have I stunned you into complete silence?
Can you talk about the identity monitoring programs like a LifeLock and what you recommend in terms of proactively watching?
Sure. So there are products out there called identity monitoring or identity protection services. Generally, I don't recommend them. They do a number of things. Sure. Her question was, what do I think about identity protection or credit monitoring products? You know, products that LifeLock, like LifeLock. You know, I think the slogan is relentlessly protecting your identity. I mean, they're just relentlessly draining your bank account. Everything they can do, you can do better. So you're paying for credit monitoring. Freezing your credit is better, and it's now free. They talk about free dark web scanning. We'll scan the farthest most corners of the dark web, and if we find your personal information, we'll tell you. And what you do with it is your own business, but we'll tell you. Well, here's an easier way. Assume it's already out there, because it is, so you don't need to pay someone to tell you. So if you freeze your credit, if you watch your bank accounts, if you set all the security to maximum, you really shouldn't need these services. They are, if you're comfortable, if you want to spend the money, I would suggest freezing your accounts, freezing your credit reports, and get these services, because maybe there might be some insurance will help you if you lose a lot of money, or maybe there's a phone number that you can call. But generally, they are not, I find that they're not worth the money. There are better things to spend your money and time on.
Could you speak to like retinal scans, fingerprint, facial recognition in terms of, are we anywhere close to that in terms of application to our computer, et cetera, that we could use as a universal password?
Yeah, so the industry said, so the question was how valuable and how useful and how commonplace are biometrics, fingerprint scans, retinal. So the industry said, let's use your fingerprints to identify you. And the thief said, let's steal your fingerprints. And so almost as soon as that had arisen, it became not really very useful because you can change your password, but as far as I know, the only way to change your fingerprints is. So there's that to consider. And they're good for now, but they are losing their effectiveness. We've seen lots of data breaches that are focused just on stealing databases of fingerprints. So they know where the weak links are. So wherever you put your security, they know what to try and break. The same with retinal scans. An interesting area is EKG. So your heartbeat is more unique than your fingerprint. So now what they're working on is a smartwatch, like an Apple Watch, that can constantly read your heartbeat. So it can not only tell that you are who you say you are, but it can tell exactly where you are. So for example, you might want to change your password online. The computer, your device will know that you are who you say you are because it can detect your heartbeat through your watch. Not at all scary, right? And it can tell that you're not in Russia, that you are in the home address that they have on file for you. That is the most appealing because I don't know a way of actively stealing millions of hearts, unless you're a Nigerian prince. Then you end up breaking them. But so that's where we're going as far as biometrics are concerned. I was working 20 years ago on voice-based verification, and they broke that. So use them by all means. I use a thumbprint and an iris scan to get into my phone. And it does work, but don't rely overly on it.
So why should we trust password managers?
Because they work and because they've been around for many years, and as far as we know, they haven't been broken yet. They've tried to break them. But the weakness in the password manager is the master password that you choose. So if our only challenge to you is that one password, make it really strong and complex and change it often, focus on that one. Because as soon as you've locked your password in this password manager, they're all encrypted. So even if the bad guys get in, it's just garbage. But if they get their hands on that master password, it's just like you logging in and they own your entire life. And speaking of passwords, if there's one password I would tell you to focus most on, it's your personal email. Because if I look at my personal email, I've had this account for 15 years. Everything I do and everyone I know is in that email account. All the places I've gone, all the people I'm connected with, lots of very sensitive attachments, everyone in my family. So they could build up an instant picture of my entire life just by breaking my email password. And yet most people, we know historically, they save the tough passwords for the bank accounts and the easy passwords, password 123, for their email accounts. So the one password you really ought to change today is your email password. That's the one that they really want to get their hands on. Any other questions? Come on, give me some hard questions. You at the front.
Can you expand on the email and ways to protect ourselves when we're using email?
Yeah, so one of the best ways to protect yourself from email and through email goes back to what I mentioned earlier. Stop clicking on stuff. Email generally doesn't hurt you unless you click on stuff. So mostly when people are sending you fraudulent emails, they want you to do typically 3 things. They want you to download the attachment, click. They want you to click on a link, click. Or they want you to respond and send some information to them. They are getting very, very good. They're getting very, very clever. There's a thing called a business email compromise. Anyone been a victim of a BEC, business email compromise? It's what I talked about earlier, where they send you an email. It looks so legitimate, and it's usually about an urgent transfer of money to someone from a boss or from a family member, and everything looks legitimate, and they will research you. So they know your pet names. They know the kind of language that you use. They know where you live. They know who family members are, and so many people fall for it. But it goes back to what I said earlier. It requires your involvement. If the email comes in and you do nothing but read it, you're safe. So if you stop clicking on emails, the number one rule for email is just not. There's rarely something in an email that is so urgent that requires you to click on it. If it's someone sending you a funny video, you've probably seen it, and it's probably not that funny anyway. If it's someone sending, photos of their wedding, just go to the site or wait till the party and they print them out. I don't know if anyone prints photos anymore. But stop clicking on stuff in emails, because we know, again, bad news, bad statistics, the majority of hacks, the majority of data breaches are traced back to employees clicking on stuff. It's the #1 favorite attack of hackers. Who thought the simplest tool on the planet was the one that undoes most security? So stop clicking on stuff.
Most financial institutions send their customers emails
Yes,
with links.
I know. I know.
How do you try to distinguish them, or do you just say, I'm not going to do it?
Just don't click, because yeah, exactly. I mean, they won't be told. We've been telling them for years. If you keep giving this advice to your customers to stop clicking on links, and you keep sending them emails with links, you're not really a great advocate. So if you stop clicking on links, and usually the link is something that benefits them, it's an upsell, it's a new feature, it's a new product. If you're not clicking on it, you're not upselling, and they're going to get annoyed, and they're going to stop sending you clickable emails. So yeah, just don't, no matter who it comes from. And the reason, even if it's legitimate, you have to get into the habit of stopping. You have to get into the habit of that critical pause. Wait, now, I know it's from my bank, or I know it's from Bartlett, but I'm just not going because I don't need to, because I'm not 100% sure that someone didn't spoof an email.
My son said to ask you about a VPN.
A VPN, okay, a virtual private network. So it's really a way of surfing the internet privately and secretly. It's pitched as a security tool. It's not really, it's more of a privacy tool. If you're, a reporter and you're working in Russia and you don't want the Russians listening into your conversations, it's a very useful tool. You're going to be glad that you had it. It does slow down your internet significantly, especially the cheaper commercial version. It's a service. So you sign up for the service, and they route your internet through this virtual private network that's secure and safe, and no one can eavesdrop. It's good if you're really worried about privacy. You have to pay for it usually. They're $5 or $10 a month. So if you are paranoid, which is not a bad thing, they're good. But they don't stop identity theft, and they don't stop data breaches, and they don't stop people stealing your passwords. They just protect that communications at that time. So if you're visiting certain websites, it stops them tracking your shopping and your surfing and that kind of stuff. But again, people make the mistake, like a credit freeze. If I do it, everything's good. I don't need to do anything else. It's one of 1,000 little things that you need to do. And if I can just get you to focus on 5, I think we're winning. Was there a question over here?
What about paying your bills online?
Paying your bills online I actually like. Because paying your bills by check means you have to have a checkbook, which is no longer a safe thing to have, because you have to get statements to your house, which means more mail with financial information. And then you have to sign a check, and you have to put it out. So there's a lot of stuff that can be intercepted. I remember speaking to a very notorious identity thief in prison. He said America was built for identity theft, particularly because of the mail system. Because if you look at compared to Europe, for example, we have our mail delivered in the front door. The mail carriers hate it because that's where the dog is. But still, we get it through this little metal hole in our front door. In America, you create these little mailboxes. Now, mail is money to a thief. So you create these ornate mailboxes, and you put them on the side of the street. Not even in your house, on the side of the street, right? So it's not only on the side of the street, but it's exactly at the right height for someone driving a car to wind down the window and put their hand out. He said, if you just put it down there, email theft will be so much harder because you've got to get out of our car and people will see it. So if they put it up there, or they put it up your driveway, but they put it right on the curb where I don't even have to stop. Just slow down, cruise by, grab your mail, and I'm on. And even better, when you're putting the really good stuff out, like you're paying a check, you put up a little red flag. So when an identity thief drives down the street, he's got all these mailboxes going, pick me, pick me, pick me. He said America was just built for identity theft. And here's a typical scam that we see around tax time. You make your check out to IRS, right, if you're paying taxes. I don't know if you pay taxes anymore. But you make it out to IRS. So this woman created a company called BRS. So they went out and they stole all these checks as IRS, and they changed the I to a B. It's very easy. They lodged them in the account. She stole $500,000 before she was caught. So identities are typically stolen in two ways. Information stolen from data breaches, which makes it to the black market, and people cruising down your streets. And we know there are about 10,000 active identity theft gangs in the US, and they hire people just to steal mail. All they'll do is steal mail. They'll rent a hotel, usually with a stolen credit card, and then they will go through the mail and pick out the stuff that's good and then dump the rest of the stuff that's not. So much safer to go online. However, just be very careful that you're not going to the wrong website. Be very careful when you're typing in a URL. Click on something if you've got your own list that is not coming through an email. But online leaves a paper trail that you did pay, how you paid, when you paid, and you're just taking that temptation away from identity thieves.
So, how do you know if this relates to being sure you're at a safe site? So let's just say you log on to a financial institution, for example, Schwab.
Right.
There was a time that a green bar would show up, it would sort of indicate, I don't see those anymore. So, is that something that, can you comment on that?
Yeah, so the way you're supposed to be able to tell that a site's legitimate, it's got HTTPS. Sorry? Oh, I'm sorry, yes. The little green lock that you used to see on the top of a website that says it's secure doesn't seem to be there anymore. It is. They just changed it to black. I don't know why. But it means that the site's secure, but only kind of. So what it's saying is that your connection to the site, so if you're sending a password from your computer to the site, or your username, or you're transferring money, that connection is protected. But the site itself might not be legitimate. So again, it comes down to vigilance. If it's a site that you go to often, make sure you're spelling the name correctly, always correctly. A perfect example was a couple of years ago, the government instituted freecreditreport.com, all right, where you could get your free credits. And every thief on the planet registered every other variation of freecreditreports.org, your free credit reports. And consumers was just so bewildered, they were all going to the wrong websites. They were entering the social security number to get the free credit report, and the thieves are going, thank you very much. So again, it comes down to vigilance, because all you've got to do is, a thief can register multiple domains that are very, very similar, and then they'll send you an email. And it could be from a major bank, so they think, well, maybe 6 out of 10 people who open the email are with that bank, and everything looks legitimate, and they've got the little green lock, which they can fake. So you just have to be very careful typing in whatever you're going to, or store them as bookmarks. So after the first time you go there, all you're doing is clicking on the link that you already have verified is genuine, and you're not making that mistake like so many of us at our age. Our glasses don't work as well as they should, and you just get one letter wrong, and you're on the wrong website. Sorry. This gentleman here, and then I'll come to you, and then to you.
If I want to do a memorable password, as you indicated,
Right.
how far out would you feel comfortable? 16 characters, 18, 20, 25? And then can I use that because I have so many different passwords?
Right.
Be comfortable just using that one memorable
No.
from a mnemonic? And
Right.
then finally, it's all moot once quantum computing becomes...
Don't get me started on quantum computing. Okay, so the question was, how long, what's the minimum a password should be? Can you use the same password? If it's a really good one, use it everywhere. The answer for a strong password, it really has to be more than 14 to 16 characters. I hate to say that, because the average consumer has over 200 passwords, right? I have 400 and something. And they're all supposed to be original and long and complex and changed every 3 months. I don't think so. So that's why we go to password managers. Maybe at some point we ought to do just a session on password managers, because if you get comfortable with those tools, life becomes so much easier. The question of reusing your password, absolutely never. Because what they will do when they get into these hacks and they get all this information from these breaches, they pick a username and a password, and then they run it through all these stolen databases to see, well, how many other sites are using the same password. Or they might take, for example, your email address and say, okay, well, I bet you if they're using that email address for the bank account, they're using it for Instagram, they're using it for Facebook, they're using it for Twitter. So let's run that against the database and see how many times that password comes up. So if you're using the same password, they will use your email to see how many times you use that password, so they steal it from one place, they use it in a dozen other places. So pick your top 5 most important passwords, Bartlett, obviously, your email, obviously, and really focus hard on those and be just a little less careful but still vigilant with the others. But if you can, as I say, get a user password manager and take all the pain out of it. This lady at the back.
Two-part question. First
Okay.
of all, when you're on a website, Delta, whatever, and then you fill in your password and it says, has a little box, remember me, bad idea to click on that, or shouldn't click on that?
Okay, you go to a website, you fill in the password, and it pops up. Do you want to remember this site? It's convenient, but it's not secure. So essentially, your computer is remembering that password. So if someone gets access to your computer, they have access to whatever account you have. So if you're absolutely certain that your computer is secure, it might be a good idea to think about it. I suggest not, because your computer is never completely secure, especially if it's mobile. If you've got a tablet or a laptop, you can lose it, can be eavesdropped upon. So whenever that pops up, and I wish they wouldn't do it, but it's convenience. That's what they're doing. Don't allow your browser to remember your important passwords.
Okay. Then
Part 2.
pretty much answers my question about, you'll get a pop-up that says, do you want Google to remember your credit card?
Right. Everyone wants to remember it, right? Credit card number I'm not so concerned about because, again, it's someone else's money that they're stealing. And they're very generous about not holding you liable for it. So if it's a credit card number, I'm not completely against it. But how, I use Amazon, for example. So they have got my credit card on file. They're completely responsible and liable for it. And I try to buy everything through Amazon anyway. So if you just reduce the number of sites that you go to and use your password or your credit card on, you should be able to say no to all these things. But they're just trying to be convenient and get you to shop a bit more. You had a question?
Yeah, what are some of the most common scams you see today?
The most common scams today, wow. The most common tend to be malware. So these are what we used to call computer viruses. So they are trying to get into your computer or your office computer or your work computer because something in there is of value. And malware is usually delivered by email. So email and malware are probably your biggest threats, but they're everywhere. I mean, we're seeing senior scams. We're seeing heartbreak scams, dating scams. I love you, I love you, I love you. Do you love me? Yes, send me money. And people do fall for it. They built up this trust. They built up this rapport. It might happen over months. We're seeing business executive and business email scams where they're pretending to be someone that you know and they're asking you to transfer money. We're seeing scams at gas pumps. Again, they're compromised. You swipe your ATM card, your PIN, nothing happens. You get your gas, everything's fine. You get home and your bank account is emptied. We are seeing an increase in targeting higher net worth individuals very specifically. Thieves have a term for them. They call them candy stores because obviously like a kid in a candy store. So they are targeting, and they're targeting you for not just your money, they're targeting you for your connections. Maybe you're involved socially, maybe you're very involved philanthropically, maybe you're involved politically. They want to know who you know. They want to get inside your circles. They want to know your secrets. Did you have a very creative discussion with your tax advisors on a certain matter of certain offshore money? They want that so they can go back to you and say, how much is it worth to keep that quiet? Are you having an affair? Are you gossiping about someone who had an affair? They want information that they can use against you or they can use against someone else. So they will more likely target you specifically. So always, again, if you're higher value, higher net worth, be very careful about that. And if you're running, how many people, well, if you don't want to, don't put your hands up. But if you're running your own business, so if a thief takes money out of your personal bank account, you're not liable for it. They will try and make you some banks, but legally you're not liable for the loss. You have no protections on a business account. If a thief today takes all the money out of your business accounts, you're on the hook for that. So zero liability does not apply to what they call commercial accounts, which is business accounts. So be very, very, very careful about access to those particular accounts. We've seen small businesses literally wiped out. Someone got into their bank account, an employee clicked on it. It was a combination of all the worst. Sent them an email, employee clicked on the email. The email had malware, got onto their computer, a thing called a banking Trojan. Banking Trojan just sat there and waited until it recognized that someone was logging into a bank account. As soon as they logged into the bank account, they piggybacked in on the login. They got into the bank account, they changed all the alerts. They sat there for nearly 3 months looking at how low do they let the balance go, how do they manage their transfers in and out, how many times do they check the statements. They waited until the time was perfect. They made 3 transfers of nearly $500,000 each to Ukraine. They got 500,000 back. They didn't get $1 million back. And the bank denied liability. The bank said, your security is your security. Even though the company said, we have never, ever transferred that money out, that amount. We have never done business with Ukraine. Could you not have at least put up a red flag? The bank said so. So they did. That was 6 years ago, and they're still in court. But it was an escrow company, and that money was someone else's money. So it was in California. Under California law, they had to make good or close down. They were out of business, 9 people out of a job in 30 days. So protect your business accounts like your firstborn, because that can do the most harm if you run a business. So I'll do this, gentleman, and I'll come back to you.
What program, so what, should we scan our computer with this by malware?
Okay, so the question is, what do you scan? I'm going to make you so unhappy. But again, I'll try and find some good news in it. So the question is, what's the best program to scan your computer with to detect this malware? They're all the same. They're about 60, 50, or 60. They all work about the same. But here's what the hackers do. The hackers develop their malware. They send it to another hacker group called cryptors. The cryptors run their malware past all the most commonly used antivirus software and they keep modifying it until it can't be detected, until they just get that short window, it might be a day, that no one can detect this antivirus. And then they send it out to 5 million people. So when it hits your computer, not only is your antivirus not able to detect that it's malware, but once it's inside, the good stuff is programmed to take over your antivirus software, pretend to be it, and tell you everything's okay. So how do you stop that? Not clicking on stuff. Because malware only gets onto your computer by inserting stuff or clicking in it. That said, you do have to have antivirus software on your computer. AVG, Avast, Avira, Symantec, McAfee, Norton, they're all good to various levels. You have to have it on there. But be warned, and again it comes back to this terrible news I keep sharing, they know you have it on there, and if that's your defense, they've figured out a way around it. The way that they can't figure out is how to trick you into being stupid. So if you just don't click, you say, I'm not going to click it, I don't care how tempting or interesting it is, you're going to beat the most competent and determined hackers out there. So there's no easy fix. If there's an easy fix, I'd be out of a job. Over here.
Now, could you comment on internet security software produced in Russia and Eastern Europe?
Okay, the question was, computer security software produced in Russia or Eastern Europe. Would you perhaps be referring to some guy called Kaspersky? Maybe? No? Okay. All right. Okay. Because there is this major Russian antivirus company called Kaspersky, run by a Russian called Mr. Kaspersky, that the State Department has now outlawed because they think they're working for the Russians. We don't know if it is, but some of the most common antivirus software today is made in places like the Ukraine and Hungary. Malwarebytes, for example, I think he's Ukrainian originally. I don't have any particular objection to foreign-made antivirus software. I would prefer that it's developed in the United States simply because some countries, they have regimes where you have no choice but to share your code, share your secrets, provide backdoors, and you can't talk about it so no one ever really knows. So I would stay, I mean, if you look at the most popular, Avast, Avira, and AVG, and they're all made in Czechoslovakia. Well, the Czech Republic, I think now. So I would simply do your research, go the ones that are most popular, but stick with the US if you can. And he's at Kaspersky particularly because they have such close ties to the Russian government, particularly if you're wealthy in Russia. I can't speak, maybe you can, for other non-American, but yeah, you have to be cautious that when you're installing, we have the same thing with Huawei, you've seen the discussions over Chinese companies. There are certain risks you run when you use very high-profile hardware software made by very large foreign companies. There's always a risk. The gentleman?
We have an IMAX security Apple product have to be given their pledge. And secondly, if you do get held to ransomware, who do you call?
Okay, so the first part of the question was, are Macs better than the rest? And the second one is ransomware. If your computer's affected with ransomware, who do you call? So the first one, I switched from Mac, or from Windows to Mac about 7 years ago. Best thing I ever did. I've never had a computer virus, and I have 7 or 8 Macs and various versions of them, and they've never crashed. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they're inherently more secure. They are built to be a bit more secure, but the main reason we weren't seeing as many malware attacks on Macs was it was a business proposition. If 90% of the population are using Windows computers, that's what you build your malware for. And it's just that not that many people were using Apple products. And we used to see it at conferences with the people, you use Mac? No, I never use an iOS or I said, what's that phone? Oh, it's an iPhone. Therefore, you're using an Apple product. So what killed the dream of security about Mac products was the iPhone. You had all these people who didn't think they were Mac people, but they had Apple products. So we are seeing that shift. I would say it's much safer to use a Mac, but it's not that much safer. The gap is closing a little bit. There are certain features where you have to click and put in a password to give permission to install an application, but you don't know what's in that application. It's only as safe as the scanning that's been provided. And the other half of the question was ransomware. That's a very good question. Ransomware scares the bejoodles out of me, because ransomware is the first time that malware could affect all of us. Before, malware used to be, if you got it, your computer got slow, or you had these weird pop-ups, or it redirected you to CompuServe. Remember CompuServe? And usually the worst that you have to do is wipe your hard drive and start over again. What ransomware does, it's the malware family. It usually comes through clicking on something. It will hijack everything on your computer and say, unless you pay us X thousands or X millions of dollars, you're getting nothing back. Now, that might not be too much of a problem if it's personal, but what if it's business? We've seen cases where entire cities have been hijacked and held hostage. Imagine it's a hospital, and now they have locked all patient files. Not only do you not know who your patients are, you don't know what they're there for. You're back to paper charts. You don't know what their medication regimes are. And the hackers are saying, unless you pay us $5 million in Bitcoin, you're not getting your information back. Now, if you're a small business, it can be just as devastating. And we are seeing it particularly impact small business. Again, the single employee clicked, boom. They encrypt all your files. You get this message in broken English saying, pay us X amount of money in Bitcoin. Hands up how many people know how to buy Bitcoin, right? So it is one of the scariest because it really, really does work. It affects all of us. It affects individuals more because we don't have much protection. We've got basic antivirus software and our habits. And the last part of the question is, what do you do when you get it? If you're an individual, probably not much. You can pay the ransom. You might get the code back to encrypt, decrypt everything. You might not. You're really only encouraging people to do it again. So it is, going back to the bad news, there's not a lot of good news when it comes to protecting against ransomware. It's one of the most dangerous types of malware, particularly if you run a business, particularly if you've got sensitive customer files. Imagine waking up in the morning and have to tell all your clients, I have no idea who you are anymore. I don't know what our history is. Every file I've had in you is now locked. It really, truly is scary. The best defense is just the hygiene. It's just the habits. Don't click on stuff. Here's one thing I would do. I've done it. Get a cheap computer, a cheap Mac, a cheap Google computer, and just use it for your most sensitive accounts. So most of what comes in to a computer comes in through cross-contamination. Your kids are using it for homework. You're surfing the internet and you go to an unprotected website. You plug something in. You have email installed. Just have a cheapo computer that's, ramped up to the nth degree in security, but never surfing it. Don't install any email software. Don't let your kids use it, and just use it for your online transactions. That really reduces the chances that malware is going to be infected from something that you did or that your kids do. You can buy a cheap computer now for $200. I highly recommend that you do it, or use a tablet. Tablets are still far more secure. I would highly recommend doing something like that if you have highly sensitive accounts, and particularly business bank accounts. No, sorry, this lady here, and then I'll come to you, sorry. Yeah, I should point more forcibly. That lady.
I do not have a PayPal account.
Okay,
But
good.
most websites, you can click on your credit cards for a PayPal account.
Right.
Over the last 3 months, I've had 2 credit cards that have gone into PayPal. And of course, I find them on my statement.
Right.
And, I don't have a PayPal account. How secure is a PayPal?
PayPal is as secure and insecure as any other website. I mean, PayPal is just an online financial community where you pay for stuff. So it's only good as the password you have to it. And PayPal allows you to pay typically in a couple of ways: your credit card, a debit card, or your bank account. Most people still connect it to the bank account, which is not such a good idea, because if they get inside PayPal, they can empty your bank account. I try not to use PayPal, and partly because the customer service is not that good, meaning if you have a problem, it's very hard to get through to a human who will talk to you. I always use credit cards. Again, someone else is carrying the risk, someone else is carrying the loss. If the worst thing I have to do is cancel the card and get a new number, I have it in 48, 24 hours. Stay away from PayPal only because it's just another layer of security you have to think about, another password you have to think about, and how often do you actually need it? And sometimes the fees are higher too.
Apparently, they took my credit card and created a PayPal account.
So then what the thieves, probably the hackers got their hands on your credit card, and then they opened up a PayPal account because it's much easier to pay for stuff on PayPal. They have the stuff delivered, they sell it, and that's how they turn it into cash. That's one of the ways they will do it.
Same person that did both.
Okay, so again, just cancel the credit card number. That's probably the only thing you could do. But if you still had the credit card number, they could keep doing that. And again, a lot of the checks and balances that PayPal should have, they don't have.
So whose antivirus software do you use?
I use Sophos, S-O-P-H-O-S. I also use AVG. And simply because it's free, it's easy to use. They're always trying to upsell me to something, but I just say no. But again, it's not that much better than others. But it's got a good reputation. It's got hundreds of millions of users. It's well tried. It's well tested. I actually sold my first antivirus software in 1987, and it was Sophos, so I have a nice history with them.
How do you spell that?
S-O-P-H-O-S. So the question was what kind of antivirus software I use. I use Sophos and I use AVG, Czech company.
What gives you so much confidence in password management?
So the question is, what gives me so much confidence in password managers? Only because they've been around for over a decade and there's been no major breach of them. Now imagine every hacker on the planet right now is trying to break password managers, because that's the holy grail. That's hundreds of millions of real passwords and real user accounts and all that kind of stuff. They have been very, very strong so far. And there's always a battle in security between convenience and security. If it's convenient, it's less secure. And password managers are convenient. But the other option is that you use crappy passwords, or you keep reusing the same passwords, or you don't use strong passwords. So I'm confident that the hacker community has been targeting for more than a decade and are still being defeated by them. So they must be pretty good. And remember, all your passwords are already encrypted. So even if they break in, it's just garbage. They can get a sense of maybe your IP address. They might know your name or your username, but they're not going to get that treasure trove of all your passwords and the accompanying login information.
What's the benefit of encrypting your computer?
The benefit of encrypting your computer, good question. So encryption is a technique that's as old as the pharaohs, code making. So you're encrypting your data. So again, you have to have a key. It's kind of like a password. You're encrypting or turning the information into garbage. So if it's stolen, it's valueless. If you have sensitive information, I highly recommend that you use encryption. So let's say you got a laptop that you use for clients. Use encryption. Encryption is, again, it's either a software program or it can be included in the computer. It's getting a bit complex, so maybe we might actually do a newsletter or something about it. But you can buy it as a software program, and you can select the files that you want to encrypt. They could be sensitive files on your computer. And if your computer is lost or stolen, that data is useless to anyone. And it's considered so strong that in most states, if you're a victim of a data breach and you can prove the data was encrypted, technically it's not a reportable data breach. I know that was the way it was in California. So encryption is a very powerful way of keeping a secret secret. Your phone calls in most cases are encrypted. When you go to use an ATM, it's encrypted. By the way, Holly was very good to point out that I won the first contract to encrypt Ireland's entire national ATM network back in 1988. In fairness to her, there were only 100 ATMs in Ireland at the time. So I just, full disclosure, but it was all of them. I got all of them. So yeah, encryption is very good. It's very powerful. It's everywhere. A lot of times you don't see it. But if you've got sensitive information on a computer, on a laptop, even on a phone, encrypted, it means your mind is at ease if that device is ever stolen or malware gets into it. It means it's useless to them.
How secure are Venmo, Zelle, some of these transfer payments that are so common?
Good point. So, everybody wants you to transfer money some way. So there are all these things popping up, like PayPal. So Venmo and Zelle. And they usually partner with your financial institution. And it's a much easier way to transfer money. I've used Zelle a lot, and I found no issues with it. Shame on me, though, I haven't looked at their policies. I haven't looked at, well, who's liable if something goes wrong. I haven't looked at what my privacy rights are. Who are they sharing my personal information with? Now, obviously, they can't share my bank account information, but they might share what I'm using Zelle for. So if I'm using Zelle to pay for stuff, they might say, well, this is his age, and this is his background, and this is what he likes to buy. So they're pretty safe from what I've heard and what I've seen, and they're usually embedded within in my case, within my bank, so I have to log into my bank first. I'm comfortable using them so far.
Do you have any concerns about Wi-Fi use in public places?
Good point. Wi-Fi use in public. I would avoid using it unless you've got a VPN. So most Wi-Fi in public places is open season. So if you can connect, a hacker can as well. So you could be sitting in Starbucks and you could be logging onto your bank account or doing whatever you're doing that you don't want other people to know about, and a hacker can be sitting right next to you looking at what you're doing. And it's very, very common in airports. So you go to an airport and it says, Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky, whatever. I mean, it's terrible when it's a really long name because you can't tell what's the real one and what's the fake one. So anywhere there's a free Wi-Fi, there's going to be probably 10 fake ones. So if you go to a hotel, it's very, very difficult to figure out. When you log on and it pops up all these networks, you have no idea which is really the hotel's network. Same with Starbucks and any coffee shops, same with airports. So if you are using free Wi-Fi, use it to surf. Don't use it to download. Don't use it to share a bank account number, log on to anything. If you are going to a hotel or a Starbucks, ask them what their specific Wi-Fi network is. That's not a guarantee. It may still be insecure. But, it's convenient. It's again, convenience versus security. But if you're using free Wi-Fi, unless you really have to, don't use it to log on to important, sensitive stuff. Again, it comes back to this here. Just, if I don't need to do it, I won't. I can do it later. I can wait till some other time.
It's shocking from your earlier comments about mail and checks that bank accounts and other financial accounts should be managed online.
Yeah, so the question was, is online banking better and using e-statements? Personally, I think it is. I mean, for starters, you're saving a lot of trees, but you're cutting down on paperwork. It's either paperwork that you're sending out in the form of bills that you're paying with checks, or it's statements that are coming to you. Either of those can be intercepted, and they all tell some kind of a story about you. So I tend to do all my bill paying online. You can set up alerts, so it's due in 30 days, it's due in 15 days, it's due in 3 days, it's due, all right, old lady, I'm going to pay it. So you get these constant alerts reminding you to pay your bill. You have a track record of what you paid and when you paid, so it can't be disputed. And you really just, you're making life harder for identity thieves because there's less junk for them to steal. So I recommend going online, but just be careful. Be careful with your password, be careful when you're logging in, and be careful with those e-statements, that it's not someone else, a fraudster, sending what looks like a bank statement or an account statement. But it also makes it easier for you to check your statements every month, because you all do, right? You all go, you go through line by line every statement every month, right? See, there's a payment for $1.35, and of course you call someone to check on that was. You probably didn't, and that's another little thing I may as well mention while I'm here. If you see a lot of little payments on your credit cards, your bank accounts for odd numbers like $1.37 or $2.10, they're probably testing the credit card to see if it's valid and your vigilance to see if you catch it. And if you don't, maybe the next one might be $2,000. So always check your bank statements, and that's the beauty of online statements. They're emailing them to you. You can scan down through them, but just make sure that you don't click on something that you're not supposed to click on. How safe are personal hotspots? Really, we're coming back to Wi-Fi. There's no good answer to that. It's like how safe is our computers. They're as safe as the vendor that's providing it. They're as safe as who's offering it. They're as safe as what kind of encryption they're offering. They're as safe as the coders who wrote it, and they're safe as how you use it. So if you're going to use a personal Wi-Fi hotspot, again, unless all the answers to those questions are good, use it for surfing, using it for checking the times of a flight, using it for maybe a quick text message, but don't log on to a bank account. Don't use it for sending sensitive email, because you just can't be that certain. Again, convenience over security is very convenient. Just don't do it for stuff that can wait until later, because it's that moment, that little mistake, that little it'll be all right, that you might regret later, and I'm going to be up here in a month saying, I told you so. Any more questions? Come on, you've been very quiet so far.
Why wouldn't everything be encrypted?
Why should everything be encrypted? Two main reasons for encryption. Again, encryption comes back to code making. Encryption keeps other people out of your business. So if you're logging on to your bank account, a hacker can't see that you're logging on. They can't see what your password is. They can't see what you're downloading. If you're making a phone call, they can't get that information. If you're sending an email, they can't read that information. If you're sending a text message, if it's encrypted, they're locked out. If passwords are encrypted by a password manager, they can't get at them. It's just keeping snoopers out. But the beauty of encryption is that so far, and again, mentioned quantum computing, we're not quite there yet, but it's almost impossible, I'll say it is impossible, to crack a properly designed encryption algorithm. So if encryption is used properly, you're almost 100% guaranteed to be safe. So if you're encrypting information properly on a computer or a laptop and they steal a laptop, very unlikely they're getting any information off that, which is why it's so highly recommended. At government level, it's a mandated, as long as you're using the right encryption in the right way. But in most cases, you won't even know. When you use your phone, you're not getting a message saying this line is encrypted or this conversation is encrypted.
I think he wanted to know why not encrypt everything.
Oh, why not encrypt everything? Because it can be very difficult. Because encryption can be very complex. It involves prime numbers, it involves complex computations, it involves key management, public key, private key. Good encryption, the reason it works, it can be very computationally complex, very hard to manage all these keys, who's supposed to know what. So in some areas, it's automatic, it's by default, because you don't have to do anything. But encrypting everything all the time can become a little bit too complex. But we are getting there. I mean, the phone that you have in your pocket now is so many more times more advanced than the computer that first computer that you had. So that's why it's getting more seamless and easier. But for a lot of cases, and again, going back to why there's so many data breaches, they're not encrypting the data. If they did, there wouldn't be so many breaches. But for the businesses, it's complex. It's an overhead. They have to manage the keys. They don't want to do it because it costs them money. They don't particularly care if you lose money. It's a sad reality of a lot of corporations these days that their bottom line is more important than yours. Anything I haven't covered today?
From an investment standpoint, are there companies that you think are leaders in the industry that are above and beyond what others are doing?
You mean as an investment advisor, as a wealth manager?
No, looking at companies and stocks that give us Palo Alto, and then we have
Oh, that's a loaded question. So, so here's the small print. I am not your investment advisor. So the question was, are there any particular security firms that I think are better than others or a better investment, if I'm understanding rightly? That's very hard to say because fortunes change in the security industry. As we see, as more of them are filing for IPOs, we're suddenly realizing how dark the red color is. They're $500,000 revenues, but their losses are $250,000 and climbing, and that's why they're IPOing, obviously. So I certainly wouldn't give any advice. I would be very careful because it's an oversaturated industry. I don't know if that's kind of a double use of terms. It is a highly saturated industry. There are a lot of copycat products, a lot of copycat technologies, a lot of, in Ireland we call them Mayfainers, retours. A lot of companies, everyone's promising absolute security and next generation. Every product is next generation. Why just focus on this generation? Fix that first and then move on to next generation. But there are a lot of good, big, successful security companies out there. But if you are investing in security stocks or security portfolios, just keep this in mind. There will be a reckoning. The market will clean itself out, will settle itself at some point, and all those copycat that really don't add any particular value, are not going to IPO, are not worth acquiring, they may be in trouble. And I think maybe in the next year or two we might see that kind of house cleaning. Wow, you people are very patient. You've been here. I think we've only seen 2 people leave the room and 6 fell asleep.
Okay, maybe final question. How secure is the United States government against international hacking?
Wow.
The Koreans, the Chinese, and the Russians.
Okay. So how safe? How safe is the whole nation? I mean, so I've got through your iPad and I got onto your phone, and no. So how safe is America as a country from state adversaries? It's a very good question because a lot of what the government does affects you. My personal opinion is we're not doing a good job at all. Election security sucks because Washington can't get its act together and do it. It knows what it's right, what needs to be done. And when I say Washington, I have to be very careful. The ex-State Department here, the people who work in Washington are really the best and the finest that we have. They know exactly what to do, but they're not getting the permission, they're not getting the approvals, they're not getting the funding to protect us. We are doing an awful job. We are nationally, we are very far behind. Their hackers are better than our hackers. I mean, Korean hackers, Iranian hackers are doing a better job at our hackers. A lot of it has got to do with politics and rules. We can't hack back on certain occasions. They have the incentive without consequence. If you're a hacker in North Korea, it's very unlikely you're ever going to spend time in jail. You're going to get paid for what you do. So we are very far behind in so many different ways. I wish it were different. America would be a lot richer if we could get security together because there's so much money to be made from these technologies. But that bad leadership, and I won't point any fingers because it's almost universal. It's been going on for decades. But that bad political leadership leaves everyone vulnerable. I mean, something as simple as, election vulnerability. It impacts something as fundamental as democracy, but it impacts the banks as well. It impacts legislation that protects us from data breaches. When's the last time you saw a chief executive of a major company involved in a major breach that was just utterly negligent actually go to jail? It just doesn't happen in a lot of cases because they're powerful political donors. We have a very, very broken political system which ends up cracking and fracturing a lot of things, and one of those things is security. So again, it comes back to what I've been saying before. Don't rely, depend, trust on others. You know, you're your cybersphere. You're responsible for your little corner of cyberspace, your little bubble. Take care of that, your family, your employees, and don't worry too much about the rest. I'm gonna take one last, and I don't mind if it's criticism or an observation, but then I'll have to wrap it up. So, in conclusion, you can see what a mess it is out there, what a nightmare is out there. Like I said, there's an awful lot of really bad news, scary news. And in a lot of ways, that's why I'm here. I'm not here to pat you on the back for everything that you've done well so far. It really just to scare you into realizing that bad things can happen, but the solutions in most cases are pretty easy. It really comes down to the choices that you make about your personal habits, slowing down, taking a bit more responsibility. I think it's fantastic that Bartlett took a lead on this. You'd be amazed how few financial advisors and wealth management firms are actually talking about this. There really is a belief out there that if we talk about it, we will scare our clients. And we don't want frightened clients. I think it's the opposite. I think if you're not talking about it, you should be afraid. So I really have to commend them for bringing me here to scare you. Because it not only protects them, but I think it's a tremendous service for you. You really need to know the truth. But at the end of it, like I said, bad news, good news. The good news really works. It really wins because it's entirely, almost, I shouldn't say entirely, but almost entirely within your control. I'll repeat what I said before. If you do the smart things, if you do the right things, you won't guarantee that you'll protect yourself against everything, but you will likely protect yourself against most and significantly minimize the damage of most of the rest. And that's probably the best that you can hope for. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. I'm not going to take any more questions. Sorry, hands down. But thank you for Bartlett for inviting me, and thank you all for coming.
Well, thank you for that wonderfully inspiring conversation. I felt a few extra kicks in my stomach during that, and I'm not sure this baby really wants to come out right now. I think we all have some takeaways from this that we can apply to our personal lives. At Bartlett, we are certainly committed to educating and empowering you, our clients, our partners, our friends, as we continue on this battle against cyber thieves. This commitment goes well beyond just having external experts like Neal come in and give presentations and host the security education center that we have. It's really a part of our ethos. It's a part of who we are. I'd like to invite Matt Whalen to stand just to really highlight the internal work that we do at Bartlett. So Matt is our Director of Technology. Matt Whalen is our Director of Information Technology. He is an outstanding resource for us. Under Matt's guidance, Bartlett remains at the forefront of technology and innovation, being really proactive to make sure that both your information is secure and that your digital experience is the best that it can possibly be. Matt's supported by 2 other professionals, so we have a team of 3 on site at Bartlett all the time managing this technology world. Rob, Michelle, and Kim Nickel. Rob and Kim are not here this afternoon because someone has to watch that technology house while all of us are out here. But our team's work really never stops. I took a few notes just during that about ways that Bartlett can continue to help all of you protect against these threats. The idea of paperless came up a few times. We can go paperless with your custodial statements and with your Bartlett appraisals by using the Bartlett portal. So reach out to your advisor if you have any questions about that. Just so you know, Matt and his team do regular phishing attacks against us internally. And if you are caught clicking on a bad email, you have to have a one-on-one sit down with Matt and our CFO. So no one wants that. And so we're all extremely vigilant internally at Bartlett to make sure that we're not clicking on any of those phishing emails. We use LastPass as our password manager, both for all of our work at Bartlett, and employees have been encouraged to use it outside of Bartlett for their needs to make sure that we are all setting strong passwords, including the dual authentication now when anyone logs in to our work computers outside of the office. We use encryption on multiple levels, so Matt is a wealth of knowledge. If you want to hunt him down and ask him questions one-on-one, he's there for you. You can see me if you need to email Matt, otherwise he'll get really upset with me for giving that out. So if any time that one of us at Bartlett says, please log into the portal to download this, or please give us a call to verify a wire, know that we're doing it with your best interest at heart. Thank you for joining us here today, and thank you for your continued commitment to battling the cyber thieves. Thanks.